You're listening to Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library podcast. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Overdoing It, where our team of library workers dish about their latest reads, views, and passions, alongside fascinating conversations with local luminaries. I'm your host, Lauren Walker, Director of the Coventry Public Library, and my pronouns are she, her. Today, I'm joined by Vanessa Lillie, bestselling author of Blood Sisters, Little Voices, and For the Best. She also co-authored the best-selling Audible originals Young Rich Widows, Desperate Deadly Widows, and Wicked Wanted Widows. Originally from Oklahoma, she is an enrolled citizen of the Cherokee Nation living on Narragansett land in Rhode Island. With 15 years of marketing and communications experience, Vanessa was a columnist for the Providence Journal and hosts an Instagram live show with crime fiction authors called 'Twas the Night Before Book Launch. Vanessa's USA Today best-selling suspense novel, Blood Sisters, was a Target Book Club pick, a Good Morning America Book Club Buzz pick, and was named one of the best mystery novels in 2023 by the Washington Post and Amazon. The sequel, The Bone Thief, was just released on October 28th, and we are just as excited to read it as we are to have her here as a guest today on Overdoing It. Welcome to the show, Vanessa.
Thanks, Lauren. I've definitely never been called a luminary before, so this is an honor.
The phrase local luminaries is the bane of my intro reading experience, so I'm glad that it provided some joy for you. A little bit later in the show, we'll talk about The Bone Thief, but before we get to that, let's start out, as we always do, with what have you been reading and watching?
Ooh, so I've just started To the Moon and Back, which is by a fellow Cherokee author, Elania Ramage. She is a debut. This is her debut. It was just the Reese Witherspoon pick for September. And
I've heard really good things about it.
I'm loving it. So it's this idea of the first Cherokee astronaut, but it's really kind of a family story. And she's a beautiful writer. And I actually have 2 events with her. So I'm going to read the book and then I'll have so much to talk about because we get to chat, which is kind of my favorite thing, to talk about books. So I'm really excited about that. And watching, I just started Interview with a Vampire, which has been out a little for a few years now. I think the next season's coming out, but I loved the books. I'm a big Anne Rice fan, and I, of course, love the Tom Cruise, Brad Pitt movie, but they've done such an incredible job in this new series. It's very lush, and they, I think, use a lot of the narrative from the book and the writers are incredible. I mean, the dialogue, just all of it. And so I'm very much in an Interview with the Vampire world right now, and I've been recommending it to everyone because it's really great.
Nice. It's the season for it.
And we're kind of in that season. That's right. So it's sort of a perfect thing to cuddle up in front of the fire and binge.
Yes, exactly. I haven't checked that one out. I like the book and the movie, so.
Oh, you're going to love it. I won't spend our entire interview talking about it, but they do a really cool reimagining of a couple of the characters that is a little more authentic New Orleans, that to me resonates a little more than even the book itself. So I think you're going to love it.
Nice. I'll definitely have to check that out. I just finished reading Sold by Patricia McCormick for my book club. So that is it was only 4 hours for an audiobook. So it was a quick read, but it did take me a while to read it because it was kind of heavy. So it's not what I wanted to listen to while I was getting ready in the morning. I'll just say that.
Yes.
Definitely on a nice podcast break before my next audiobook, but it was really good and definitely important. We chose it because it's a banned book and we'll be meeting right before Banned Books Week. So I can highly recommend that. And for watching, I have been watching Bob's Burgers. I've never watched it before, and I have a friend who really likes it, so she finally convinced me to try it, and I'm loving it. And my husband and I have been binging X-Files. We're going to be Scully and Mulder for Halloween, so...
Okay, well, you've got the red hair, so you're ready.
Yes, yeah, I don't have to get a wig, thank God.
you're watching two super memed things, right? So Bob's Burgers, there's a lot of really good memes, and not only are there a lot of good memes with X-Files, but there's a lot of like romantic montages on TikTok that are like fabulous, where they put this like emotional music on, and then it's just like Scully and Mulder emoting at each other. It's pretty fabulous.
Yeah, it's pretty great. I think we're on season 4 or 5 right now, and I know spoiler alert on this show that's been out since the 90s. But Scully just survived cancer. And when she was in the hospital, we were all concerned. And I'm like, okay, there's like 13 seasons of this show, though. So I know that she
Yeah.
doesn't die, and I just have to hold on to that.
And like at least one movie, maybe two movies. I can't remember how many they did after the fact.
Oh, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Yeah, there's movies.
For me, I love to see that there's like a million seasons plus movies and stuff. I'm like, okay, good. I can binge comfortably without worrying that the end is just going to sneak up on me.
Yeah, or that it gets canceled after season one or season two, and
Right.
that's a really frustrating viewer experience.
Yeah, agreed. Well, speaking of books, tell me about The Bone Thief.
Yes, so The Bone Thief is all set in Rhode Island. It's the second in a series, though I really think you can read it alone. But if you are a purist, you can start with the with Blood Sisters.
Hmm.
And the Blood Sisters is all set in northeastern Oklahoma. That's where I'm from. The main character is Sid Walker. She's an archaeologist. And so all of that story is really about northeastern Oklahoma and her sister going missing, some injustices around the Indigenous community there, all of it really rooted in history. For me, that's kind of the biggest piece of writing the series is truth and fiction. I'm really interested in the real Indigenous history, the real history of the land, the people. So for Blood Sisters, I wrote about northeastern Oklahoma, which was a mining community and ended up being one of the most polluted environmental disaster sites in the country. And of course, I grew up next to it, so I lived it. But to go back as an adult and really think about what it means was very meaningful for me as a writer. So after Blood Sisters is The Bone Thief, and that brought me back to where I live now. And I've lived in Rhode Island since 2011. And I've been really lucky to connect with the Narragansett community here. I've got friends in the tribal community. I go to the August meeting powwow every year. I've been involved with activities in the museum. So I feel connected to the Narragansett tribe in a way that I hope resonates in the book. So the Bone Thief is about the same character, Sid Walker. She's back in Rhode Island, and some remains are found that are tied to the real historical event of the Great Swamp Massacre. This was in 1675. It's when the colonists attacked the Narragansett tribe during King Philip's War, though the Narragansett were not involved in the war yet, and they attacked them. So my main character finds remains tied to that bloody battle, the bloodiest battle that was on Rhode Island soil. And it was mostly women, children, and elderly who were attacked because it was their winter fort, their place of refuge and protection. And so those who weren't killed were put into slavery and indentured servitude. So there's just a lot of history in that. So that sort of opens the story. And as the title indicates, the bones are stolen. And so Sid begins to investigate it. And she learns that there's also a missing Narragansett teenage girl. And both those remains and the girl have ties to a mysterious secret society called the Founders Society. And they have ties all the way back to the Mayflower. So I got to delve a little bit into colonial history as well. And so it's the investigation into these crimes, but it's also a chance for my main character to really think about the field of archaeology, to think about what we do with remains, which, you know, that is her job,
Hmm.
the funerary objects, and then who's telling these stories. And, you know, for just me as a writer, I thought a lot about what's on museum shelves, what's in universities' collections. And some of them are repatriated and sent back to tribes, but many of them aren't. There's hundreds of thousands of remains that haven't been. And there's not really any recourse. I mean, there's not an archaeology police that's going to storm a building, you know? And so I think it's a larger question about the stories that we tell, who does the telling, and what it really means if we as a society, you know, put these remains and these objects on shelves to be like gawked at of an active living nation of people.
Mm-hmm.
But make it a thriller.
Right. um, and how do those, artifacts and remains get repatriated? Like, what is the process? Is that like a lawsuit thing, or are they purchased back? Like, I'm struggling to imagine a world in which a museum just donates them back. Although that, as a librarian, I would love to imagine that world and live in it.
So legally, if a museum has federal funding, they are supposed to comply with NAGPRA, which is the Graves and Repatriation Act. Though that's really just starting. If you were to go to, say, the big museum in New York right now, they have a display about how they're returning the items to the tribes. Chicago has something similar. So the big museums have been doing it. You'll sometimes see headlines, especially in New England, the Peabody Museum. There's a lot of remains and personal items of tribes in these New England institutions, and universities especially. And in some cases, they have to do it. In other cases, I think they are connecting with tribes and starting the process. It's a pretty complicated process. Museums are very territorial about these items, even though they're really not theirs. And people have personal collections. I mean, I did a lot of research about sometimes they'll overstep lines and they'll get like raided by the FBI, and you'll find out that
Wow.
there's thousands of items from bones to funerary, and people are real collectors. In fact, that's really where museums started. Curio was collections. It was rich people having collected things, and you could come see their original collections. And then that continued into kind of the museum system we know today. And that system, largely, especially in the beginning, was used to erase and other different groups. And all of that work was really led um, in a way that was very white supremacist. It was very, cranium size, and it was othering. And leaders at the Smithsonian have terrible quotes about humankind and evolutionary theory. And so there's a dark past to archaeology. It's not just like sexy, glamorous Indiana Jones or Laura Croft, right?
Yeah.
It's the narrative that we have as a people about ourselves and other people. And so it's engagement with the communities whose belongings you have. There's certainly some DNA testing has been some places do to try to find some of the ancestors related to these tribes and return those items.
That's very
But
cool.
but many tribal communities do have to sue. There's a secret society in my book, and I did research into ways in which secret societies use Indigenous remains. And there was one example at Yale, the sort of mysterious Skull and Bones Club. They have remains of the Apache warrior Geronimo, his skull, and I think his femur. And the descendants of Geronimo sued to get those items back, and they did not get them back.
Wow.
There's another real example in the book of a Supreme Court case in Rhode Island of a sachem, or like the chief of the Thomas Ninigret, and his daughter. Their remains were stolen, and funerary objects were stolen. People took them. They were acquired by the Rhode Island Historical Society and other people. The family sued for them, and they lost the case at the Supreme Court.
Wow.
So there's, a lot of examples of how remains have been treated and viewed, throughout history. And just I try to use, fictionalized examples of that, but certainly people can dig in to some of the real cases I cite, because that, as I said, was really important to me, to use the real history of Rhode Island and this land and its relationship to the Narragansett tribe in particular.
I should have mentioned also, what have we been reading? I did read Blood Sisters
Oh, thank
before
you.
I read Sold. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. And I have to say, on top of the fact that I enjoyed it as a just entertaining thriller, I learned a lot from it. And in case our listeners don't know, I am like SPF 50 white. So um, I'm a white reader reading a book about Indigenous culture, and most of what I know about Indigenous culture comes from reading fiction by authors like Tommy Orange and Brandon Hobson. And I mean, there's so much that I learned reading Blood Sisters, but one thing that I found was really interesting was the mention that this is not really a spoiler alert, I don't think. Sid is not 100% Cherokee.
Yep.
And her grandmother says to her, "You are Cherokee, counting blood is for white people." And I thought that was really interesting. And I was wondering if you could talk a little about that detail and why you included it.
Absolutely. Well, I'm white presenting. I think if you just saw me on the street, you'd be like, oh, there's a white person, which I am, that's part of my heritage too, of Irish and other things. But blood quantum, which is sort of what you're talking about, is a measurement the government created, not just for Indigenous people. The Black community has dealt with blood quantum, in terms of whether or not you're white or Black. This one drop rule, things like that are a part of a lot of identity. So within the Cherokee tribe, for example, there's not a measurement of blood quantum in order to be an enrolled citizen. You just have to have descendants who were recorded. And the Cherokee, as a tribe, took very meticulous records because they had to. And so, with descendants within the tribe, then you are Cherokee. Other tribes have other rules. And it's hard, I think, as a conversation because there's a lot mixed in there. There's identity issues, there's who's enough, right? And then there's, assumptions about people. But I think for the most part, a lot of Indigenous leaders have been trying to educate people that, you don't necessarily know a person's traditions or history, which is good. It means you talk to people, you learn from people. But certainly the kind of stereotypes that we're fed by media about what an Indigenous person looks like, what their life is like. I have been asked before if we ever lived in a teepee, things like that still pop up. It's also common for people to ask, how much Native American are you? Which is a very abrasive question. Please don't do that. And because that's really rooted in colonialism, is rooted in white supremacy, because blood quantum was a thing that was used to control land and resources. And so that was sort of that connection from her grandmother to just sort of say, you are Cherokee. It was sort of a reminder in that way.
Yeah, it really made me think about the way I know a lot of white people who have done like the ancestry.com or the, 23andMe DNA tests, and it's like a fun activity to find out what percentage of what you are, and how that is a type of privilege to have, that you're not concerned that whatever percentage you are of something is going to affect you negatively if the government finds out or if someone else is tracking that data. So I personally haven't done that because I just have a general paranoia about giving my DNA to a company.
Yeah.
I couldn't
Yes.
tell you what I'm afraid of, but I just don't
Mm-hmm.
like the idea of it. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting and made me also think about the fact that your identity kind of is more cultural, more
Mm-hmm.
so than whatever your blood is. And my biggest thing is my dad was full-blooded Italian, but I don't know anything about that side of the family. I don't have my own pasta sauce recipe. Like I don't really, as much as I enjoyed visiting Italy, I don't really identify as Italian as much as I do French Canadian or Irish, and I have French Canadian and Irish recipes in my family that we pass down, and I feel more connected to that smaller quote unquote percentage of my identity because that's the culture that I was raised with. So it does make sense.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And I think the possibilities of connecting with our culture, because I think often, this sort of American ideal cuts us off from our lineage in that way. And
Hmm.
I do think there's such an important connection to learn and celebrate the recipes, the plants, the traditions, the stories, to stay connected to that. I think it feels really good. And certainly, in Indigenous communities, actually was just at it's called National Holiday. It's the Cherokee kind of big powwow and celebration in Tahlequah. And I went to a stomp dance, and it was on private land because it had to be because it was illegal to practice Indigenous religious practices until I think it was 1978. And so this land had been having these dances way, way before then, when it was illegal and hidden. And so it's, interesting to think about the ways in which we've had to keep our culture hidden, and whether or not it is apparent based on assumptions on the outside. We kind of carry those traditions with us. And in a way, it is a privilege to be able to sort of be exactly who you are in the ways you want to be, because that just hasn't always and isn't always the case for people.
Right. And on the topic of ancestry, I was there at the Rhode Island Library Association conference when you gave the
Yeah.
keynote speech. And I was really interested in the amount of family research that you've done related to your books. And I was wondering what it's like writing fiction based on your actual family, and deciding what to fictionalize, and doing justice to the family members that you base characters on.
Yeah, so much of being Indigenous is fighting erasure. I mean, that was the game plan all along, is to eliminate us. And so to be able to write a book where I'm using it's Sid Walker, so Walker, which is a great last name, Lauren, your
Yeah.
last name as well. That's the name of my family member who was on the Trail of Tears, George Washington Walker. And so I knew that I wanted to give Sid that legacy. There's also a cemetery in Blood Sisters that's based on my real family cemetery in the general vicinity of where our family's allotment land was. And so I wanted to keep all of that really true, and connecting her kind of in a similar way, though her Indigenous Cherokee side is her dad in the book, whereas in mine, it's my mom. But I knew that it was important to kind of include those Cherokee elements, because for so long, that identity was oppressed and suppressed. And it's also and even just using a few Cherokee words, to have your language, which is something we're all fighting to keep, in a book, that's on shelves, and the last name of that ancestor, who I'm sure wondered if they would even continue on one generation, to kind of have that as part of the story really meant a lot. And, there aren't any family members like who are alive that I necessarily reflected much more than that ancestry piece. Professionally, though, my main character works for the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and my uncle worked his whole career for BIA, and my brother worked about 20 years for BIA. And Sid's not based on them as people, but professionally, it was very interesting to build a character who has her feet in two different worlds. It's the world of the government and the BIA, which was created under the Department of War, which is a term that's coming back. But, and for the purpose of erasing Indigenous people. And then, of course, now, thank God, a lot of it has changed. And there are so many good people, including my uncle, my brother, who are working really hard within BIA to support tribal communities. But she's having to really develop those relationships with the Narragansett tribe, and build trust, which is a hard thing to do when there's a lot of really reasonably done distrust, like for good reason. And so that conflict within the character was really interesting to build. And I, certainly researched a lot about the BIA history, especially in northeastern Oklahoma, because they, directly stole billions of dollars from the Quapaw tribe, which that's in Blood Sisters, through the mining contracts. And very little of that money has been recovered by the tribe. So there's sort of, these ongoing, very real pain points in tribal communities against the BIA, and I was doing interviews with actually a BIA archaeologist who's not Indigenous. And so she talked about, her relationship building within Indigenous communities, as well as, the very real pushback she gets. And that felt very inspiring to me creatively, because she almost viewed her job, and I put this in my character, Sid, that she's almost like a midwife from the past to the future, to really help tribes be able to successfully continue within this world that is somewhat controlled by the government, right? It's, we want to run a cable pipeline through your land. We want to, clear cut this forest. We want to, like, it's a negotiation to be able to have your own sovereign land and have it continue. And so she's a part of that role. And that was just really interesting for me to write.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at it, and phrase it, that she's
Mhm.
a midwife. I like that. I like that description.
yeah, after I interviewed her, because I actually wasn't thinking of making Sid an archaeologist, but after that interview, I was like, oh, wow. And then, of course, it happened to be that archaeology is so relevant to, as we were talking about, Indigenous remains and funerary objects, and thematically really symbolic within the Indigenous community, and was a huge part of the Bone Thief. But, she wasn't going to be an archaeologist until I did that interview.
Very cool. And throughout all of this research that you do, what do you do to decompress? Because I would imagine that, even without having a familial connection to this history, it would be distressing to be constantly looking up atrocities and injustices. So I can't imagine what that must be like to, be reading about things that your own family experienced. What do you do to find some peace?
Well, I'm not very good at that. I actually, the Bone Thief was really hard to write. It took me about 2.5 years. Part of it was not necessarily because of my own family history, because that was more blood sisters, but the fact that I was writing about the Narragansett tribe, and that's not my tribe, and it's a community I do feel some connection to, and I just wanted to really do justice by them.
Hmm.
I just put a lot of pressure, as I should have, on myself. I mean, it's, kind of an honor and a privilege to get to write about them. But when I kind of finished the book and I was like looking back at the past 2.5 years, I was like, man, I've really been cranky a lot. Like, this has really stressed me out. And so I walk my dog and try to read. I read a lot of romance novels, actually. They help me, it's hard to read thrillers while I'm writing thrillers, but I do love a nice romance because you always know there's a happy ending. That's helpful. Um, I also got really into tarot card readings, and spirituality is a big piece of it. And then I usually write a fun book after my serious book. So I have this Young Rich Widows series, which are based in 1980s Providence. I co-author those, and I have a lot of fun with my co-authors. So writing a fun book, either as I'm writing the hard book or at least like brainstorming it a little bit to just get me in a more playful, creative place, really helps. But I actually am trying to be a lot more mindful of that as I work on hard books again, because I don't think I was very good at it. Please don't ask my child or husband. I'm sure they
Oh,
would agree.
no. Well, we learn and we grow, and
Yeah,
I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about your mental health as you're going
yeah.
through this. Because even just reading Blood Sisters, I was thinking, which, like you said, is more connected to your family. I was just wondering how you're not constantly screaming.
Well, I think we all have reasons we could be constantly screaming,
That's fair.
outside. So, but I do think, that questions of like, how am I doing? And do I really need to be as upset as I am? Is that going to change anything? And then having outlet. I mean, writing does help, I think, feel like I was doing something to share it. And so in some ways it's healing to write, but I think mindfully taking time to balance your mental health is a really good practice.
Yeah. And so, circling back to The Bone Thief, which is the newest book, the sequel to Blood Sisters, I don't want to give anything away for anyone who hasn't read Blood Sisters, but we kind of leave Sid Walker in a place where maybe she's feeling a little bit more connected to her family in Oklahoma, which is a good thing. And I'm wondering, what can we expect for Sid's journey in The Bone Thief?
Yes. Well, there is a character who is a big spoiler who I won't mention,
Okay.
but if you've read Blood Sisters, she's there and she's very prominent in the second book. And I loved writing her. And it just takes place a few months after Blood Sisters, because in Blood Sisters, Sid had sort of found out her wife Mal is pregnant and they're going to be parents, which is such a big identity shift it was for me. And I felt like I wasn't quite ready to write Sid as a new mom. That would just take up a lot of emotional space in the book. Whereas I knew I wanted it to really be much more about an exploration of colonialism and exploration of like the Narragansett history, bones and things we've been talking about. So I was like, I'll just set it a few months after. And also, I do think Sid had a little more growing up to do, and I wanted to kind of see that on the page. And she needed, her wife Mal is back in Rhode Island during Blood Sisters, and honestly, Sid is not plugged in as well as she should be to their relationship and the fact that they're going to be parents together. And so I think in The Bone Thief, she proves a little bit more that she's going to be the kind of parent we would hope she would be. And Mal also has a little more proactive role in the story itself, which I think is really nice. You get to see their relationship on the page, see their little house out in South County by a pond, and see this life that they're building amidst trying to solve this mystery and do right by the Narragansett tribe to help them find this teenage girl. So I like that it was kind of immediately after. That was kind of fun to write because there just was, I think, there was still more growth for Sid to do.
Yeah, I do enjoy a sequel that picks up immediately after the
Mm-hmm.
first one leaves off. It's nice when there's a big gap of time and you're like, oh, let's find out what's happened. What have we
Mm-hmm.
missed? But I also just really like when like the first scene, even of a movie that's a sequel, is the last
Mm-hmm.
scene of the previous one. I'm like, great, I didn't miss anything. I know exactly
Yes.
where we are.
Yep. That's exactly it. Yeah. You miss very little going from one book to the next, which I think is fun.
Nice. And is there anything else that you'd like our listeners to know about Blood Sisters and the Bone Thief and what to expect?
Other than just a lot of gratitude for the support of, well, librarians actually, from my debut, Little Voices, you all have been amazing supporting these books. I was actually just in a library yesterday, Burville's library, it's a beautiful library, for a book club, and I just saw Little Voices sitting up to be checked out. I just am so grateful. And writing about Rhode Island, all of my books are mostly in Rhode Island. Blood Sisters is the exception. It's in Oklahoma where I'm from, but otherwise everything else is in Rhode Island. So not being here, it's been really wonderful to be able to share that. And with The Bone Thief, I really did want to, share another really important part of Rhode Island and our history that way predates Rhode Island as a state. So I'm grateful for that. And I've got events kind of ongoing too. If anyone wants to check out on my website or my socials, I would love to see people. I've got a lot of events through November and December too. I'm going to basically almost every bookstore in Rhode Island. So it's Vanessa Lillie, and Lillie is spelled not like you think. It's Lillie. So it's just vanessalillie.com for my website, and all of my events are listed there. I have a newsletter that I send out kind of regularly with giveaways and fun things. And then I'm always on Instagram, tragically. So come hang out with me on Instagram or Facebook too. I just started a book club on Facebook where I share kind of what stuff's going on. I'm always also recommending a lot of Indigenous writers. So if you're interested in other Indigenous work, I have actually a list on my website too.
Oh, that's
Um,
great.
yeah, we just, publishing is like any business, and you have to really demonstrate that the marketplace wants it. And so I just keep trying to push all of these wonderful Indigenous authors. So we keep, the doors that have swung open as far as they have, to keep that open and hopefully even further, because, we need more voices.
That's great. Yeah. Like I said, a lot of what I've learned about Indigenous cultures is from fiction. So I always encourage people um, to read really any fiction that they enjoy, because you'll probably learn something from it that you weren't expecting.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, me too. And it's probably going to be fun, whether it's a thriller or a romance. You'll have a good time too.
Exactly. Well, we wrap up the show with a segment called The Last Chapter, where we talk about a library or bookish related question. And as we're getting into the chilly fall season, readers might want to cozy up with your books at home. So today I wanted to ask if there was a custom Vanessa Lillie candle that readers
Oh,
could burn to set the scene while reading your books. What would the scent be and why?
I would love a candle that kind of smells like sweetgrass. When I think of kind of South County, where a lot of the Narragansett tribal land is, that very sweet smell. If you roll the windows down, especially like on the drive to Newport, I love the grasses, the smell here. It's really unique. I don't find it a lot of places, and maybe a little bit of ocean too. Ocean is such an important part of Narragansett tradition and ceremony. And so I would love it to also maybe have a little bit of ocean scent to it too.
Nice. I like that. When I wrote it, I was immediately thinking of so I visited Ireland a few times when I was in high school with my best friend whose grandmother lived there. And I studied abroad there for 4 months. So as I was saying, my Irish heritage is something that I really connect with. And when we were there staying with my best friend's grandmother, she lived out in the country and everyone burned peat moss in their fireplaces. And the specific smell of peat burning is just like in the air there. And it smells so good to me. And a couple of years ago, I found an incense that smells like peat. And it comes in a little incense burner that's like a little Irish pub, and the smoke comes out of the chimney. And it is like, if I'm having a particularly good day or a particularly bad day, that's what I'm burning. And it just like makes everything great. So that's what my candle would be.
You're back in Ireland and it's just, you're cozy and everything is good.
Exactly. And then throw in like maybe a little bit of the smell of like, I don't know, some baked good, some freshly baked bread or something like that. Just like add that in there a little bit.
That sounds amazing. I will take one of those candles as well.
I'll take one of yours too.
Perfect.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I have really enjoyed this chat.
I have too. This has been so great. And thank you again, especially to the Rhode Island librarians. Your support means so much to me. I'm so happy we're connected.
Yeah, of course. I want to encourage our listeners to buy Vanessa's new novel, The Bone Thief, out October 28th, or borrow it from your local library. You can follow Vanessa on Instagram and X at Vanessa Lillie, and on Facebook and TikTok at Vanessa Lillie Author. Overdoing It is proud to be a resident partner of the Rhode Island Center for the Book and brought to you by library staff and community members all around the Ocean State. The project has been funded in part by the Rhode Island Office of Library and Information Services. If you'd like to share your answer to our last chapter question, send us an email at overdoingitpod@gmail.com or find us on Instagram at overdoingitpod. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us to help us reach more Rhode Islanders. Thank you for listening, and this has been another episode of Overdoing It, the Rhode Island Library Podcast. We're overdoing it, but you're doing just fine.